this is completely off the cuff and I'm not using any scripts or anything. And so please, I'm going to apologize in advance for the amount of humming and hawing I do, and as well as perhaps going off the subject a little bit and rambling. So I hope you'll forgive me, and yeah, on with the show, as it were. Hello and welcome to Best Binocular Reviews. My name is Jason. Today I thought I'd do something a little bit different and take you behind the scenes, as it were, and along with me out into the fields as I test these Hawke Frontier EDX 8x32 binoculars. The idea being that I'd like to show you some of the techniques I use, the things I'm looking out for, as well as some of the equipment. And we're going to start right now. As well as the binocular under test, two other really important pieces of equipment that I carry with me with just about every single review I do happen to be my benchmark binocular and carrying them the binocular harness. The reason the benchmark binocular for me is so important is the fact that with every review I try to remain as consistent as possible, especially when it comes to the view that I'm looking through. So for me to be able to compare what I see against something that remains constant over time is super important, and therefore I do feel that my opinions remain far more consistent than they would be if I was just saying, oh, this view looks fantastic. And over time, obviously your perception of what is great changes, and it can change with the weather conditions, it can change with a lot of factors. So having a benchmark for me is really important. Now obviously, one of the most important things I look for when testing any binocular is the overall image quality and image brightness. On a day like today where we've got loads of sunlight, bright blue skies and loads of light, it's actually quite difficult to notice any major differences between that of my benchmark binocular and the binocular under test. So as I will do with all my reviews, I will test them once again once the light conditions are far from ideal. So I'll wait until the sun is dipped below the horizon, for example, and then I will compare the views between these two again. Because I feel then once you have the light is not at its optimum level, that's when you start to notice a binocular of greater quality performing better than those that are of less quality. Something that I look really closely for is the amount of color fringing that you get around the edges of objects in the view. On a sunny day like today, it can be quite easy to spot. So basically all I'm looking for is around the objects. So in this case, I'm looking around the edges of the leaves in this plantation that we have growing next to my house, this nut tree, noisette in French, I forget what it is in English. So the leaves around these trees, I look really closely around the edges of the leaf, as well as some of the little branches lit up by the bright blue sky. Chromatic aberration, you'll see the sort of halo that you get around these objects, and binoculars that are able to reduce the amount of chromatic aberration, so basically they're a binocular that's better able to direct the individual wavelengths of light as it passes through the whole system, will show less color fringing than binoculars that are less good at doing so. Now in general, this is one reason why lots of binoculars and the term ED glass has become so popular, because ED standing for extra low dispersion glass. Now basically what this does is it allows the makers of a binocular to have a bit more flexibility when designing their optics, more flexibility and able to direct each of the individual wavelengths of light. Obviously with one of the purposes being that they will better direct them together and thus reduce the amount of color fringing that you see in the actual image. And so with a test like today, what I will do is I'll compare the amount of color fringing that I see on my binocular that's under test, as well as against my benchmark, and I'll be able to rate it accordingly. Now whilst it is true today we have really good weather conditions, once you get into a more deeply wooded or forested section like we are right now, the light conditions definitely drop, because this is obviously because the light is being filtered out by the canopy above me. So this is something that is really important to keep in mind, and it's something that I will definitely look out for when testing a pair of binoculars, because a binocular that uses higher quality optics and coatings and performs better in low light will definitely show up against a binocular that is less adept at this. When choosing a binocular, this is also something really important to keep in mind. So for example, if you mostly operate out in the open, in the fields, rolling hills for example, or at the coast where there are generally better light conditions than someone, for example, who operates in forested areas like this quite a lot, or who often goes out, sort of very early in the morning as the sun is rising or as the sun is setting every single day, which binocular you choose and what configuration you choose is really important. So today I'm testing these mid-sized binoculars, which the advantage being is obviously they're really nice and small and compact, easy to carry about. But because their objective lenses are a little bit smaller than your standard, say, 42mm binocular, they are not able to capture as much light and therefore won't perform as well, especially in low light conditions. Out in the open, where there's plenty of light, these will have, even comparing them, these 8x32s to an 8x42, the image brightness will probably look to be the same on a day like today. But once the light conditions drop, this can become a limiting factor. So in these situations, a binocular with bigger objective lenses or a lower power would have an advantage over a binocular with small objective lenses and higher power. Something else that's really important to keep in mind if you're in a forest or woodland area is your magnification. So today I'm testing out these 8x32s, 8 times magnification. For me, in this sort of environment, this is ideal because the viewing distance I have, so if I'm looking at birds and things like that, or some wildlife on the ground, it tends to be at a closer range. The birds are in nearby trees and I don't need to see very far into the distance. In this environment, having a higher power actually can be a big disadvantage because with your increased magnification comes a narrow field of view, and therefore it can make it much more difficult to quickly find what you're looking for. And in the case of today, where I'm looking for birds, something that's hopping around in the trees, having a very narrow field of view can make it actually quite difficult to locate your subject. Whereas having a nice wide field of view, which these do provide, makes it that much easier to locate what you're looking for, the birds, for example. And therefore, if they are falling through, jumping through the trees or moving about erratically, with a wide field of view, it's way more easier to follow all the action that's going on. If I was out in the open, much more light, in open fields or at the coast, there you will want to, obviously your viewing distances increase, and therefore you'd want a higher powered binocular. Also, when you're looking at something at things in greater distances, having a narrower field of view is less of a disadvantage, and therefore having a 10 times, or sometimes, or even some people, a 12 times binocular would be a better choice. So basically, to start off with, this today is, as you can hear, is a really windy and blustery day, very overcast, and I'm out walking in a forest quite near to my house. So today's going to be a really good test for them because the light conditions are low, and therefore it's going to push these binoculars to the limit. Okay, so I'm getting blown away here. Next up, and another important piece of kit that I take on all my reviews is my Bino harness. Inside the Binocular Harness is my current benchmark binocular that I'll be using to compare the view through the binocular that I'm testing against a benchmark that I use for all my reviews within that same size and magnification category. So today's benchmark is an 8x32. And what I always do is I put it into a binocular harness. This one is by S4 Gear. It's one of my favorites in that, for a number of reasons, which I'm quickly going to show you now. Just put everything down, sorry. So yeah, this binocular harness, I really like it because, for a start, as I'll show you, it's really quick and easy to take on and off. Got my microphone in the way there. So you just clip it on the sides with these two things, these two quick release clips over here. So you slip it on your neck, sit on your side, and you're ready to go. And the other thing that I really like about it is the actual binoculars themselves. They fit in, so you don't actually have to, you can leave that loose over there. So when I'm using them quite often, I can just whip out the binocular, put it back. I've got a full review to this harness, which I'll link to down below. But another quick advantage of this is you can attach the binocular to the harness really quickly. So for me, that's super important because, say for example, tomorrow I might be testing an 8x42, and for me to swap out this binocular with my 8x42 benchmark is really quick and easy. So for me, that's a time-saving thing that is really important. And obviously really important to me is to be able to carry around 2 pairs of binoculars at least. So the one I'm testing and the one I'm using as a benchmark. So, and then I can quickly compare the views through the two, as I stop along the route and I'll start looking for something. It's really quick and easy for me to compare what I see between the two binoculars. When testing a pair of binoculars, something else that I'll be really looking very closely at is just how much softening you get around the edges of the view. So sometimes with some binoculars, as you look right at the edges of the view, there's a big transition area between where the something that you're looking at when you're 100% focused on an object. So for instance, if it was a bird, if I was lucky enough today, but generally I'm just looking at the edges of branches and leaves and things like that. But as you get the transition from being completely sharp, at the edges of the view, it tends to get more fuzzy and sort of have a dark fuzziness around the edges, right at the edge of the view. Now, some binoculars, you'll have this sort of, as it becomes more and more fuzzy, becomes more noticeable towards the center. You know, you get a much thicker ring, as it were. So what I'm looking for is just how sharp the image remains from the center right to the edge, without having to make any focal adjustments. A link to this also would be the fact that I'm constantly looking for an image. I want it to be as nice, as flat as possible. And so the center, what I'm looking at is the center of the view that I'm looking at is in focus, and it remains in focus all the way to the edge of the view. Sometimes with cheaper optics and cheaper glass, this is not the case. I'm also looking at the color reproduction. So in today, going back to the weather conditions, I'm taking into account that it's very gray and dull. So therefore, it's even more important that your binoculars produce not only a bright image, but you get really nice color reproduction. Now, especially with cheaper binoculars, you often get, the ones that use cheaper glass and cheaper coatings also, or less coatings, and cheaper glass on the prisms especially, you get a sort of artificial tinting of the image. So sometimes it can be sort of yellow, and if you just look at the binocular by itself, possibly over time you don't notice it because it can be quite subtle. But if you're comparing it to another binocular, you sometimes can notice this difference. So what I'm also looking for is really an accurate color reproduction. So I want the colors to look as it were in real life, or to my eyes as it were anyway, and without any artificial tinting or things like that. But also you want the colors to be vibrant, you know. So on a day like today, if you've got a good quality pair of optics, there's no doubt that looking through a pair of binoculars, partly because you've got a more magnified image, just makes it seems more, what you're looking at, more exciting and more vibrant. And that's something that you're looking for. But you don't want it to be too, especially in terms of the contrast, you don't want to have too much, because the problem then is it becomes the image that you're looking at starts to look artificial and sort of almost cartoony like. So the level of contrast is important, and also the color reproduction to make sure that it's accurate, as well as being vibrant but without going too over the top. Right, okay, so I'm almost back home now. I've done some pretty good testing with these binoculars, and I'm pretty happy with how they've performed, but also happy with the fact that even though on a day like today it's really tempting to stay indoors and not go outside, because I know I'm not going to see that much wildlife, and you know, it'd be much nicer to be snuggled up in front of a fire or something like that. But in terms of testing these binoculars, it's been a great test. I hope that this video comes across as slightly interesting. I'd like to know in the comments down below, please. I know I probably waffle quite on a bit when I'm not using a script, and I definitely know that I go and way too much. There it goes again. It's a habit that I'm finding really hard to overcome. But I'd like your comments. Is something like this interesting to you? Would you like me to bring you more stuff like this in the future? As for the test of the binoculars, I'd say it's a good test. I'm hoping that this microphone, that it's able to mask some of the rushing of the wind, because I know with my camera, if I'm just recording the sound of that, it would be really bad right now. Because I know with my camera, if I'm just recording the sound of that, it would be really bad right now. So it's going to be a super hard test for these lavalier microphone. So having said all that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers for now.